Welcome to Coffee and Wisdom. I'm David Breeden, minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, and we are a historically humanist congregation, and this is a humanist perspective on theological questions. Well, let's get a definition of humanism in here. This one from the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a progressive philosophy of life that, without theism or other supernatural beliefs, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. There you go. That one from the American Humanist Association. One of the things you will find about the definitions of humanism is that every group calling itself humanist has a different definition, but that's okay. We are examining the subtleties. Uh, this month, I'm going to be looking at utopia and dystopia as a way of thinking about reality. As I mentioned last week, the word utopia is based on Greek ou, the prefix meaning not, topos, place, but it also alludes to a similar sounding prefix, eu, meaning good. So a good place or a place that doesn't actually exist. And the word was first used in the book Utopia, 1516, by Sir Thomas More. The opposite is based on the Latin prefix dis, or bad. So dis topos, a bad place. The English philosopher John Stuart Mill coined dystopia in 1868 as he was denouncing the government's Irish land policy. He was inspired by Thomas More's writing on utopia and that definition from Wiki. Well, just start looking around you if you want to see dystopias. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, a novel, has now been made into a TV series. The book I'm showing here is a graphic novel. So there is lots of appearances of these ideas of The Handmaid's Tale. We will notice several things about the picture, the now famous red and white uniforms that the women wear, the very weird and very systematic portrayals of automatic kind of interactions in this, very mechanical. Another popular one recently has been Amazon's The Man in the High Castle, which imagines a world in which the Nazis and Japan won the war, the Second World War, and that would be then the aftermath of that. Again, a dystopia. Uh, More recent one is a series of books called The Hunger Games that was turned into a series of movies called The Hunger Games. And again, very popular around the world. So why are portrayals of dystopias so popular? Well, maybe because they resemble the headlines. Fahrenheit 451 about burning books. Well, we are certainly hearing a lot about banning books in the US today. And yes, perhaps the world looks a lot like a dystopia when we watch the news. So, what are the characteristics of dystopias? One is that propaganda is used to control the citizens of society. The story, the narrative is created by some higher authority. Information, independent thought, and freedom are restricted, sometimes entirely so. A figurehead or concept is worshipped by the citizens of the society, either a theocratic figurehead of some sort or maybe some kind of idea. Citizens are perceived to be under constant surveillance. This is a very central idea that Big Brother is watching all the time. The citizens often fear the outside world. In some cases, they are literally inside glass bubbles, fearing the outside world that maybe has been destroyed by nuclear war and that kind of thing. And sometimes they are a nation simply made very afraid of all of their neighbors, but they fear the outside world. Citizens live in a dehumanized state. Again, putting uniforms on everybody, making everyone very, very, very rigid in the social constructs, very much a dystopian idea. The natural world is often banished or distrusted or destroyed, for that matter, again, with nuclear winter and that kind of thing. Citizens conform to uniform expectations, and individuality is bad. And that's one of the driving forces, especially behind the earlier dystopias, as we will see. And the society is an illusion of a perfect utopian world. In other words, the citizens, through the propaganda, are often told that the society is the perfect one. Well, let's think a little about where dystopian stories come from. And we have to start with Yevgeny Zemyatin, 84 to 1937, who published a book called We in 1921. He was a pre revolution Bolshevik, but he became disillusioned by the subsequent totalitarian practices and he left the Soviet Union. He had to ask permission from Joseph Stalin himself. Stalin surprisingly said, okay, go away. And so he moved to Paris. He is considered one of the first Russian dissidents, which makes a lot of sense since he was in on the creation of the Soviet Union and then was one of the people who was too revolutionary for the subsequent history of the Soviet Union. So, We was published in 1921. The Bolshevik Revolution had occurred in 1917. So, what was happening in the Soviet Union very much impacted how he was writing this particular novel. The cover of one of the novels versions here, the most influential sci-fi classic of the century. And yeah, we will see why in just a moment. And yes, you can look around. The Economist ran 4 years ago now a little review saying an eerie dystopian prophecy by a disillusioned. And it does seem interesting that, at least in the English language world, we often rediscover we for various reasons. But Yevgeny Zemyatin's parable looked forward to climate change and surveillance culture. Well, again, you see that is just straight in line with what dystopian writing is always about. Zamyatin said this: true literature can exist only where it is created, not by diligent and trustworthy functionaries, but by madmen, hermits, heretics, dreamers, rebels, and skeptics. And again, this idea fits directly into the idea of dystopias as having individuals who react against them, that they stand up for their individuality and thus somehow break the dystopia or are broken by it, which is a couple of different ways the plot can go. He wrote this: those two in paradise were given a choice: happiness without freedom or freedom without happiness. There is no third alternative. Well, we've talked a lot about the myth of the Garden of Eden and the choices that Adam and Eve made. I think this is a very incisive reading of the book of Genesis. Those two in paradise, Adam and Eve, were given a choice: happiness without freedom or freedom without happiness. There was no third alternative. So you can have happiness or you can have freedom, but you can't have both. Take your freedom away, and the happiness is the resulting happiness is somehow structured into some kind of an automatic mechanized world. He also said knowledge, absolutely sure of its infallibility, is faith. Again, a critique on science and over reliance on science. And again, science is often in dystopian novels and movies questioned in some way. And almost always nowadays, dystopian scenes go along with science fiction very well because they're talking about the future, usually. He also wrote this: I am aware of myself, and of course, the only things that are aware of themselves and conscious of their individuality are irritated eyes, cut fingers, sore teeth. A healthy eye, finger, tooth might as well not even be there. Isn't it clear that individual consciousness is just sickness? Well, that sounds a little bit extreme, but if you know The Underground Man, written by Dostoevsky, you will know exactly where this sentiment comes from. Dostoevsky thought that as the world became happier and happier through material resources, people would get sadder and sadder and act out more and more. So very much a strain within this way of thinking. We was published in 1921 in Russian and then came out in an English language translation. Nowadays, there are many, if you would like to read the novel. It directly led in 1932 to Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, which is often in the English speaking world seen as the first of the dystopian novels. Um, Huxley very vehemently said he had not read We, but it is a little bit coincidental how the two plots work so closely together. And then probably the most famous from this era is 1948, uh, the publication of 1984 by George Orwell. What Orwell had done, he didn't think 1984 was a particular watershed event year, but rather he merely reversed the last two numbers of the year in which he published the book, 1948 to 1984. And yes, Big Brother is watching you. And again, this is one of the basic characteristics of dystopian worlds. George Orwell wrote, "Power is tearing human minds to pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing." George Orwell became quite a critic of totalitarian regimes on the left and on the right, and he believed that the totalitarian regimes of the future would be creating realities for their people. Now, in 1927, a science fiction dystopian movie came out. Most people don't know that it was first a book. Metropolis was a book by Thea von Harbaugh. She was married to Fritz Lang, who was the director of the movie Metropolis. She wrote the book on spec so that they could make the movie from the book. And they were a married couple at the time of the creation of the book and the movie. Metropolis is very famous for its many, many scenes of futuristic worlds that are definitely dystopia, distorted images of human beings turned into robots, marching lines of people in a very, very kind of regimented way. Uh, a famous scene. We have our hero fighting time, time being a mechanized version of the way to drive people forward. And usually in dystopias, you have really big looming buildings because, yeah, those look scary and they look bureaucratic, and bureaucracy being the exact opposite of what dystopian people are looking for, that which is their own individuality. Well, thanks a lot. I'll look at some more contemporary dystopian ideas on Thursday. And thanks so much for joining me today. And I will see you on Thursday at 9 a.m. Central Time live. And this is available all the time on YouTube. Thanks for listening today.